When people think about the 1980s in America, they often picture neon lights, loud music, and bold fashion. But there's another symbol that truly defined the decade: cars. The streets of the 1980s were filled with machines that represented freedom, power, style, and personality. Cars weren't just transportation, they were identity. Whether you were cruising through a big city boulevard or driving along a quiet suburban road, the vehicles people drove said a lot about who they were and what they dreamed about. The 1980s was a fascinating time for the American auto world because it combined the leftover spirit of the muscle car era with new technology, sharper designs, and a growing fascination with speed and luxury. Automakers were experimenting, redesigning classic models, and creating vehicles that looked futuristic for their time. Many people today still consider the cars of that decade some of the most memorable ever built. One of the most recognizable symbols of American performance in the 1980s was the return of the Ford Mustang, produced by Ford Motor Company. The Mustang had already been legendary since the 1960s, but in the 80s it evolved into a new style that balanced performance and everyday usability. The Fox Body Mustang became extremely popular, especially among younger drivers. It was relatively affordable, powerful enough to feel exciting, and easy to customize. On American streets, Mustangs became a common sight, often modified with louder exhaust systems, custom wheels, or upgraded engines. For many drivers, owning one meant you were part of a culture that valued speed and freedom. Another huge player in the 1980s car scene was the Chevrolet Camaro, built by Chevrolet. The Camaro represented pure attitude. Its sharp angles, aggressive stance, and powerful V8 engine made it one of the most iconic American cars of the decade. If you watched movies or TV shows from the 80s, chances are you saw a Camaro speeding down a highway or parked outside a club. It had a presence that people noticed instantly. For young drivers especially, the Camaro symbolized rebellion and excitement. But the 1980s weren't just about American muscle cars. The decade also saw a growing influence from European performance vehicles, especially those coming from companies like Porsche. Cars like the Porsche 911 were admired for their sleek design, advanced engineering, and incredible performance. In cities like Los Angeles and Miami, these cars became status symbols. Seeing a Porsche cruising down the street told you something about the driver's lifestyle, success, confidence, and a taste for precision engineering. One of the biggest differences about cars in the 1980s, compared to earlier decades, was how much style mattered. Automakers started focusing heavily on design that looked modern and futuristic. Sharp lines, digital dashboards, pop-up headlights, and aerodynamic shapes became popular. Some vehicles even featured early electronic displays and voice warnings, which at the time felt like something from science fiction. People were fascinated by technology, and cars became a place where that excitement was visible. Driving culture itself was a huge part of life in the 1980s. In many American cities and towns, young people spent their evenings cruising. This meant driving slowly along popular streets, music playing loudly from the car stereo, windows down, and friends hanging out together. Cars became social spaces where conversations happened, friendships grew, and sometimes even relationships began. For teenagers especially, getting a driver's license was a major milestone because it meant independence. Suddenly, you weren't limited to your neighborhood, you could explore. Music and cars were deeply connected during the 80s. Cassette players became standard in many vehicles, and drivers often carried collections of tapes with their favorite music. Rock, pop, and early hip-hop filled the streets through car speakers. It wasn't unusual to hear booming bass from a passing car, especially in areas where custom sound systems became popular. Some drivers spent serious money upgrading their stereos just to create the loudest or clearest sound possible. In many ways, cars became mobile entertainment systems long before smartphones existed. Another important aspect of 1980s cars was customization. People loved modifying their vehicles to stand out. Custom paint jobs, spoilers, tinted windows, aftermarket wheels, and performance upgrades were extremely common. Car culture wasn't just about buying a vehicle, it was about making it yours. Car meets and informal street gatherings often took place in parking lots or popular cruising areas, where drivers showed off their cars and compared modifications. These gatherings created communities of enthusiasts who shared a passion for design, engineering, and speed. Of course, not everyone drove high-performance cars. Many Americans owned practical vehicles such as sedans, station wagons, or pickup trucks. These cars were used for daily life, commuting to work, taking kids to school, or running errands. But even these everyday vehicles reflected the trends of the decade. Interiors became more comfortable, dashboards more advanced, and designs more modern. The automotive world was changing quickly, and people could feel it every time they got behind the wheel. One interesting truth about the 1980s is that cars were becoming safer and more technologically advanced compared to earlier decades. Manufacturers started paying more attention to fuel efficiency, emissions, and driver safety. While the raw power of the 1960s and early 70s muscle cars had faded somewhat, the 80s created a new balance between performance, efficiency, and modern engineering. This shift shaped the cars we see today. Movies and television also helped define which cars became legendary. When a car appeared in a popular film or TV show, it could instantly become famous. People didn't just admire the vehicle, they wanted to drive something like it. Hollywood had a powerful influence on how cars were perceived, and the 1980s were full of memorable automotive moments that shaped public imagination. Another reason cars mattered so much in the 1980s was geography. America is a huge country, and driving is deeply connected to daily life. Unlike some places where public transportation dominates, many Americans relied on cars for almost everything. This made vehicles not only practical, but emotional. Road trips, late-night drives, and long highways became part of the culture. People associated cars with adventure, freedom, and personal discovery. In cities, flashy cars often became symbols of success. Luxury vehicles parked outside restaurants, hotels, or clubs showed that the owner had achieved something. In smaller towns, a powerful car could instantly make someone stand out. The car you drove could influence how people saw you. It was almost like a statement to the world about your ambitions and personality. Looking back today, classic cars from the 1980s have gained a new level of appreciation. What once looked futuristic now feels nostalgic. The boxy shapes, analog controls, and mechanical character remind people of a time before everything became digital and automated. Car enthusiasts around the world collect and restore these vehicles, keeping the spirit of the decade alive. The truth is, the cars of the 1980s weren't just machines. They were part of everyday stories. They carried people to work, to parties, to concerts, to road trips across the country. They were present during some of life's most important moments. When people remember the 1980s, they often remember the sound of engines, the glow of dashboard lights at night, and the feeling of driving down a road with music playing and possibilities ahead. So when you imagine classic cars of the 1980s, think about more than just speed or horsepower. Think about style, identity, culture, and freedom. Picture Mustangs cruising under city lights, Camaros roaring down highways, sleek European sports cars parked outside nightclubs, and everyday drivers heading home after long days. The cars of that decade captured the spirit of America itself, bold, ambitious, expressive, and always moving forward.